On April 7, 1945, in the East China Sea, about 200 miles north of Okinawa, Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida nervously scribbled notes in his personal journal. The entries could have resulted in harsh punishment if uncovered by the ship's superiors. "This is not what we were told to expect," he wrote. "No battleship, regardless of its might, can withstand the impending threat." Through his radar scope, he had just witnessed a sight that contradicted everything the Imperial Japanese Navy had taught about the invincibility of their super battleship Yamato. Hundreds of aircraft signals appeared on his screen like poisonous blossoms, converging from various directions at speeds impossible for his ship to escape. The Yamato, weighing nearly 72,000 tons, fully loaded and equipped with some of the largest naval guns ever installed, was about to face an opponent it couldn't defeat. In Japanese naval strategy rooms, battleships symbolized ultimate power. However, on that day in the open waters of the East China Sea, a new reality would rewrite the final chapter of the battleship era. That morning, 32 men were aboard Yamato, unaware they were participating in history's last major battleship sortie. It was not destined to be a heroic surface battle, but rather an aerial massacre with overwhelming odds against them. The critical factor was no longer about armor thickness or ammunition weight. It was the stark reality that one battleship, regardless of its power, could not overcome nearly 400 aircraft operating in coordinated waves and enjoying complete air superiority. This shift from confidence to disaster would take less than 2 hours. The seeds of this downfall had been planted years earlier in the design offices at Kure Naval Arsenal. Between 1934 and 1937, Japanese naval engineers pursued an ambitious goal. If they could not match American numbers in warships, they would build individual vessels so powerful that a single Japanese battleship could defeat 2 or even 3 American counterparts. Captain Kikuo Fujimoto, the innovative but controversial designer behind the Yamato-class, presented his vision to the Naval General Staff in March 1934. His proposal called for a ship displacing 70,000 tons fully loaded, armed with 918 guns, and protected by armor up to 16 inches thick on the belt. The specifications broke international naval treaties and surpassed any previous attempts by other nations. Construction of the battleship Yamato commenced in November 1937 at Kure Naval Arsenal under strict confidentiality. Workers were required to sign non-disclosure agreements, with breaches punishable by imprisonment. Nearby neighborhoods had their windows covered to prevent any unauthorized observation. Palm trees and high barriers surrounded the construction site to shield it from prying eyes. When Yamato's sister ship, Musashi, was launched in November 1940 from Nagasaki, air raid alerts were issued throughout the city, forcing all residents indoors to ensure no civilian could see her. The ruse succeeded, and American naval intelligence remained unaware of the full specifications until after World War II concluded. Yamato was officially commissioned on December 16, 1941, 9 days following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Measuring 263 meters in length with a beam of 38.9 meters, she had an enormous displacement of nearly 72,000 tons when fully loaded, making her the heaviest battleship ever built. Her primary armament consisted of 9 Type 94 naval guns capable of firing shells that were 18.1 inches in diameter. Each gun barrel was 21.13 meters long and weighed 147.3 metric tons. These weapons could propel a 1,460-kilogram armor-piercing shell to a range of 42 kilometers. A single volley from Yamato's 9 main guns would send over 13,000 kilograms of ordnance towards the enemy. The ship boasted unparalleled levels of protection. The main belt was 16.1 inches thick and angled at 20 degrees for maximum effectiveness. Deck armor varied between 7.9 inches over machinery spaces and 9 inches over magazines. The faceplates of the main gun turrets were a formidable 25.6 inches thick, marking the heaviest armor ever fitted to any warship. Beneath the waterline, Yamato featured an advanced torpedo defense system incorporating multiple longitudinal bulkheads that could be either flooded or emptied to absorb the impact of up to 3 simultaneous torpedo hits without causing catastrophic damage. The test for this assertion took place on April 7th. Initially, the secondary armament included 12 triple turrets armed with 155mm guns and 6 twin mounts equipped with 12 dual-purpose 127mm cannons. For anti-aircraft defense, Yamato originally carried only 24 25mm guns, a number that was woefully inadequate and reflected the Imperial Japanese Navy's grave underestimation of aerial threats, an oversight that would ultimately prove disastrous. Yamato's propulsion system featured 12 Kampon boilers powering 4 steam turbines, generating 150,000 shaft horsepower. This formidable power plant enabled the massive vessel to achieve a top speed of 27.4 knots during trials, which was remarkably swift for such an enormous ship. On February 12, 1942, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had masterminded the attack on Pearl Harbor and commanded the combined fleet, designated Yamato as his flagship. Despite recognizing the importance of naval aviation better than most other officers in the Imperial Japanese Navy, Yamamoto had initially opposed the construction of the Yamato-class battleships, arguing that resources would be better allocated to aircraft carriers. Nevertheless, he could not resist the prestige associated with commanding from what was then considered the most powerful battleship afloat. Yamato's first combat deployment occurred in May 1942 during the Battle of Midway. Admiral Yamamoto sailed aboard the battleship as part of the main battle force, positioning his fleet approximately 300 miles behind the carrier striking force. The strategy involved luring American carriers into range for an attack on Midway Island by Japanese carrier aircraft. However, this plan unraveled dramatically when American carrier-based planes discovered and sank 4 Japanese fleet carriers within a single day. Yamato did not fire a single shot during the battle and retreated towards Japan without engaging any U.S. forces. This trend would continue throughout Yamato's service career, where she spent most of her time in anchorages due to fuel constraints and the overwhelming threat posed by American air power. From July 1942 to June 1944, Yamato was stationed at Truk Lagoon in the Caroline Islands, functioning mainly as a flagship and accommodation vessel. During this period, crew members delivered lectures, participated in training exercises, and waited for battles that never materialized. By late 1943, with American forces advancing through their island-hopping campaign across the Central Pacific, Japan's strategic position had severely deteriorated. The Imperial Japanese Navy suffered significant losses, losing numerous destroyers, cruisers, and carriers during the Solomon Islands campaign and the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Fuel shortages worsened as American submarines disrupted Japanese oil shipments from the Dutch East Indies. Yamato returned to Japan in December 1943 for upgrades. Workers removed 2 of the 4 100 and 55mm secondary turrets and installed additional anti-aircraft weapons instead. The number of light anti-aircraft guns was increased from 24 to 52 25mm units, and radar systems were added. Upon her emergence from Kure Naval Arsenal in March 1944, Yamato had become a more well-rounded warship, though the strategic window for battleship supremacy had permanently closed. The first and only instance of Yamato's main guns firing at enemy vessels occurred on October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita commanded a surface-striking force that included Yamato and her sister ship Musashi as they traversed through the San Bernardino Strait to engage American landing forces at Leyte. On October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Sibuyan Sea, American carrier aircraft relentlessly attacked Musashi for over 4 hours, inflicting an estimated 17 bomb hits and 19 torpedo strikes before she capsized and sank, claiming more than 1,000 lives. From a distance of 30 miles away, Yamato observed her sister ship's destruction. This event starkly illustrated the vulnerability of battleships to sustained aerial bombardment. At approximately 6:57 a.m. on October 25, 1944, Yamato commenced firing at American vessels for the sole time in its career. The range was 35,000 yards, and 6 American escort carriers with limited escorts were directly ahead of her. These were the vessels of Taphominus III, tasked with offering air support for ground operations on Leyte. For close to 2 hours, Yamato relentlessly pursued the American fleet, launching one salvo after another. Among her targets was the escort carrier USS White Plains. A shell struck just below its keel, causing significant damage. She also played a role in sinking the escort carriers USS Gambia Bay and the destroyers USS Johnston and USS Hohol. However, even at this apparent peak of naval might, the constraints of battleship warfare were evident. American destroyers boldly charged toward the Japanese warships, despite the odds seemingly against them. Their audacious bravery paid off. Kurita, apprehensive about submarine threats and mistakenly believing he was up against fleet carriers rather than escort vessels, ordered a retreat just as his ships neared the landing beaches. As Yamato began its withdrawal from the engagement, carrier aircraft dispatched by the American main fleet caught up with the retreating Japanese force. Bombs struck Yamato's weather deck, causing injuries to several crew members. By late 1944, Japan's strategic situation had become dire. American forces controlled much of the Central Pacific and were liberating the Philippines while gearing up for invasions within striking distance of Japan itself. The Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet had been largely dismantled by this point. Yamato returned to Japan in November 1944 and entered dry dock at Kure for repairs. On November 25, while navigating through the East China Sea, Yamato's convoy was targeted by the American submarine USS C. Leon, which sank the battleship Congo along with a destroyer. Yamato managed to escape unscathed. The remainder of 1944 saw extensive work on Yamato at Kure, including installing extra 25mm anti-aircraft guns, for a total of 162, and enhancing radar systems alongside improved damage control facilities. On January 3, 1945, when Yamato exited dry dock, she was as prepared as any battleship could be for the aerial warfare dominating the Pacific at that time. However, her readiness proved meaningless because there was an absence of fuel, air support for sorties, and a strategic objective for battleships in a war that had outgrown their relevance. Captain Kusaku Aruga assumed command of Yamato on November 25, 1944, bringing with him extensive experience from his service aboard cruisers and battleships. In March 1945, American forces landed on Okinawa, an island situated only 350 miles south of Japan's home islands, including Kusu. Seizing control of this territory would offer the United States critical airfields and harbors needed for their planned invasion of mainland Japan. On March 19, carrier-based aircraft from Task Force 58 launched a massive assault on the Japanese naval base in Kure. Over 300 planes attacked ships anchored there, damaging Yamato with one direct hit to her bridge area and numerous near misses that caused additional harm. 5 crew members lost their lives, while several dozen more were injured. The American invasion of Okinawa commenced on April 1, 1945. The landings proceeded without significant resistance, as Japanese troops had retreated to fortified positions in the island's rugged interior. Prior to this operation, during a conference held in Tokyo in March 1945, Emperor Hirohito was briefed about the defense plans for Okinawa. Army officials detailed their extensive preparations for both ground combat and kamikaze air attacks. It is reported that upon hearing these presentations, the emperor posed a question that would ultimately determine Yamato's fate. What role does the Navy intend to play in defending Okinawa? Do we not have any ships available to aid in its defense? The top brass of the Navy, already disgraced by years of defeat and their inability to stop American forces from nearing Japan's home islands, felt it necessary to prove that the Navy still possessed fighting spirit. Admiral Somu Toyoda, who led the combined fleet as its commander-in-chief, instructed his staff to devise an operation utilizing the few remaining surface ships at their disposal. This plan was dubbed Operation Heaven No. 1. It involved deploying the battleship Yamato, the light cruiser Yohagi, and 8 destroyers from the inland sea through the East China Sea, with the objective of assaulting American forces stationed in Okinawa. The vessels would navigate through American naval defenses, beach themselves on Okinawa's shores, and serve as stationary artillery until destroyed. Any surviving crew members were expected to join the Army garrison for ground combat until they fell. The plan was submitted to Vice Admiral Sachai Ito, commander of the Second Fleet, on April 5th. According to reports, Ito's reaction was highly critical. He deemed the operation a futile loss of ships and personnel with no strategic value beyond propaganda benefits. He highlighted several glaring issues. The force would have minimal air support after the initial few hours. American submarines and reconnaissance aircraft would quickly detect their departure, and American carrier task forces would intercept them long before they reached Okinawa. Moreover, the fleet lacked sufficient fuel to return to Japan. Ito initially refused to carry out the order, but was eventually pressured into compliance by staff officers from Tokyo who emphasized its high-level origins. Even then, he reportedly expressed deep reservations about the operation's worthlessness and its likely contribution only to casualty figures. On April 6th at 16:00 hours, Yamato departed the Tokuyama oil depot for the final time with fuel allocated solely for a one-way trip to Okinawa. Yohagi sailed alongside 8 destroyers as part of a fleet that included around 3,000 crew members from Japan. Prior to departure, all personnel were gathered and briefed about their mission objectives. Anyone could have chosen to stay behind without facing any stigma or disgrace. Approximately 67 junior officers and some individuals who were either sick or injured were instructed to disembark in order to conserve trained personnel. The Japanese fleet navigated through the Bungo Strait between Kyushu and Shikoku shortly after midnight on April 7th. American submarines, USS Threadfin and USS Hackelbach, were stationed there based on intercepted intelligence that exposed details of Operation Tengo days before its execution. These submarines monitored the Japanese fleet throughout the night, sending continuous updates about their position. Despite being aware of the presence of these submarines, the Japanese had no means to deter them. With dawn breaking on April 7th, the Japanese fleet passed by the Asumi Peninsula and ventured into the vast expanse of the East China Sea. The ships repositioned themselves in a defensive formation with Yohagi leading, Yamato at the center, and 8 destroyers arranged in an outer ring, maintaining a distance of approximately 1,500 meters from one another. The fleet then increased its speed to 20 knots. At 6 a.m., 6 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters arrived to provide air cover for the convoy until they were due to return to their base at 10 a.m. This small contingent represented Japan's entire aerial support force. The weather that morning was cloudy with low clouds situated around 3,000 feet and sporadic rain showers, resulting in varied visibility conditions ranging from excellent to almost zero. American reconnaissance planes first spotted the Japanese fleet at 8:23 a.m. An F-6F Hellcat from the USS Essex detected Yamato's distinctive silhouette as a gap in the clouds cleared. The pilot promptly sent a contact report that reached Task Force 58 within minutes. Vice Admiral Mark Mitchell led Task Force 58 from his flagship, the carrier USS Bunker Hill. This task force comprised 16 aircraft carriers, 8 fast battleships, 15 cruisers, and more than 60 destroyers, with a combined air group of over 1,000 planes. Mitchell had anticipated Yamato's movements. American intelligence had intercepted and decrypted Japanese communications regarding Operation Tengo. Upon confirming that Yamato was at sea, Mitchell quickly initiated preparations for a major airstrike. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, initially directed Rear Admiral Morton Deo to lead his battleship force in intercepting Yamato. 6 modern battleships, including USS Missouri and USS Wisconsin, started positioning themselves for a surface engagement with the Japanese fleet. Mitchell acted preemptively by launching his aircraft without waiting for Spruance's approval, understanding that carrier-based planes could destroy Yamato more effectively and with less risk than a ship-to-ship battle. Spruance agreed with Mitchell's decision. Task Groups 58.1 and 58.3 began launching their aircraft at 100 hours. The carriers USS Hornet, USS Bennington, USS Belleau Wood, USS San Jacinto, USS Essex, USS Bunker Hill, USS Hancock, and USS Bataan launched a total of 280 planes in the initial wave. This strike force included 132 F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair fighters, 50 S-Beta-C Helderver dive bombers, and 98 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. A delay caused 53 aircraft from USS Hancock to launch 15 minutes late. These planes failed to locate the Japanese force due to adverse weather conditions, reducing the initial wave's number to 227 aircraft. Task Group 58.4 launched a second wave of 110 aircraft 45 minutes after the first. This included planes from USS Yorktown, USS Intrepid, and USS Langley. Overall, approximately 386 American aircraft were committed to the attack, though only about 280 actually engaged due to navigation challenges in poor weather conditions. Each Avenger was armed with a Mark 13 torpedo, carrying a 600-pound Torpex warhead. Each Helderver carried either a 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb or a 1,000-pound general-purpose bomb, plus 22 50-pound bombs. The fighter planes were equipped not only with machine guns and cannons, but also carried bombs or rockets. At 10:14 a.m., Yamato's air search radar picked up the first American reconnaissance aircraft. 6 Japanese Zero fighters tried to intercept them, but they were significantly outnumbered. Despite their efforts, none of the American aircraft were shot down before the Japanese fighters withdrew at 10 o'clock as ordered. After this withdrawal, Yamato and her escort ships had to face the approaching American strike force on their own. At 11 a.m., American planes began circling the Japanese fleet just beyond the range of anti-aircraft guns. Pilots from various carriers coordinated their attacks, forming strike groups aimed at specific targets. The level of coordination was impressive and professional, reflecting the extensive combat experience gained by American naval aviators over 3 years in the Pacific theater. At 12:32 p.m., lookouts on Yamato spotted the first incoming assault wave. Captain Hara aboard Yahagi later described the scene as terrifying, with large formations of aircraft circling the task force in both clockwise and counterclockwise patterns, resembling wolves closing in on prey. At 12:34 p.m., Yamato opened fire with its forward main battery turrets using specialized San-Shikoden anti-aircraft shells designed to explode into a cloud of shrapnel. However, firing large naval guns at aircraft was an act of desperation. The shells proved ineffective as American planes flew through the explosions unscathed. At 12:37 p.m., the first wave launched its attack. Dive bombers descended through the clouds and released their bombs moments before pulling out of their dives. Torpedo bombers approached from multiple directions just above the water's surface, while fighter bombers strafed decks with machine guns and cannons, killing exposed anti-aircraft crews. The noise was deafening. Yamato's 162 anti-aircraft guns were in constant operation, their thunderous fire intermingling with the explosions of incoming bombs, the screeching dive bombers overhead, and the shouts of the damage control teams. At precisely 12:41 p.m., 2 aerial bombs detonated on Yamato's upper deck, destroying a pair of triple-mounted 25mm anti-aircraft guns along with their crews. Although holes were torn in the deck, neither bomb penetrated to critical areas below. A minute later, at 12:45 p.m., a torpedo struck the port side forward section of Yamato. The underwater blast sent violent shock waves throughout the vessel, initiating flooding in the foremost compartments. However, watertight doors remained intact, and the damage was confined. At 12:46 p.m., 2 additional bombs struck near the aft center line turret. One bomb directly landed atop the turret, piercing its armored roof and exploding inside. The blast killed nearly all of the turret's crew, leaving only one survivor. Between 12:48 and 12:50 p.m., several more torpedoes hit Yamato, with confirmed impacts near both the port side engine room and boiler room. This resulted in a significant increase in flooding, necessitating counter-flooding measures on the starboard side to stabilize the ship's list. The initial aerial assault lasted about 18 minutes. Once American planes began their withdrawal, Captain Aruga received reports from damage assessment teams indicating that Yamato had sustained at least 5 torpedo hits and 4 bomb strikes. While flooding was substantial, it remained under control, allowing the vessel to maintain a speed of 20 knots. Additionally, though reduced, her anti-aircraft armament continued to function effectively. At 1,302, radar picked up the second wave of aircraft approaching, marking a significant shift in the assessment. This group included 50 planes from USS Essex and USS Bataan. Around 1,322, an F-4U Corsair from Essex struck Yamato with a 1,000-pound bomb on its port bow. Heldivers soon followed, hitting the bridge area. 5 of these aircraft were damaged by anti-aircraft fire, highlighting that Yamato's defenses remained formidable despite earlier attacks. From 1,325 to 1,330, 3 or 4 torpedoes hit Yamato's port side amidships. All torpedo bombers had been instructed to focus their attacks on the port side to expedite capsizing. This tactic proved highly effective, as flooding in the port boiler rooms and engine spaces intensified dramatically. The list to port surpassed 10 degrees. Counter-flooding measures on the starboard side temporarily corrected the listing, but reports from the damage control center indicated that the outer starboard engine room would need to be flooded to prevent capsizing. Captain Aruga faced a heart-wrenching decision and ordered the flooding of the starboard engine room, saving the ship momentarily while condemning 300 men stationed there. With no time for evacuation, the valves were opened, leading to the drowning of 300 sailors at their posts. At 1,000, 333, the third wave arrived with 110 aircraft from USS Yorktown, USS Intrepid, and USS Langley initiating attacks. By then, Yamato was severely damaged, listing heavily and moving slowly, making it an easier target. Pilots described the ship as turning in slow circles, trailing oil and burning at several points while continuing to fire every available anti-aircraft gun. Between 1,333 and 1,402, Yamato endured further damage from at least 4 additional torpedoes and several more bombs. Blazes raged across the upper decks, while water surged uncontrollably through the hull compartments. Despite frantic counterflooding attempts, the vessel's lean towards port persisted relentlessly. Speed dropped from 10 knots to 5 knots as maneuverability diminished. Steering was eventually lost altogether. At 1,402 hours, Captain Aruga received a distressing update from his executive officer. All damage control personnel were deceased, and further corrective measures were futile. Realizing there was no hope left for the ship, he ordered the remaining crew members to evacuate immediately. Vice Admiral Ito issued a final command via flag signals, calling off the operation and instructing the surviving ships to retreat towards Japan. With Yamato's communication equipment destroyed, signal flags remained the sole means of conveying instructions. In his quarters, Vice Admiral Ito accepted that he would not survive this ordeal. Meanwhile, Captain Aruga secured himself to a binocular mount on the bridge, determined to share the ship's fate. At 1,407, another torpedo impacted Yamato's starboard side. By 1,417, 2 more torpedoes struck her port side. The ship's list surpassed 15 degrees. High-temperature alarms blared warnings about critical conditions in the forward main battery magazines, but the pumps designed to flood these areas were non-functional. As a result, ammunition started exploding within the magazine compartments. At 1,420 hours, the Yamato capsized entirely to port. More than 2,000 sailors were still on board, with many trapped in flooded compartments below deck. As the ship rolled past 90 degrees, seawater entered the funnel uptakes and submerged the boiler rooms. The sudden influx of cold water into the superheated boilers caused a massive steam explosion. Simultaneously, fires in the forward magazine ignited the main powder charges. At 1,423 hours, Yamato exploded, creating an immense detonation that could be seen and heard over 100 miles away. A cloud resembling a mushroom ascended to 20,000 feet into the sky. The blast wave was so intense that it damaged several American aircraft flying overhead. The battleship fractured into 2 main sections and sank in 340 meters of water, roughly 200 miles northwest of Okinawa. Out of the total crew of 3,332 members, only 276 survived. The American aircraft had been attacking for 1 hour and 46 minutes. Yamato suffered an estimated 11 to 13 torpedo strikes and 6 to 15 bomb hits. American losses amounted to 10 aircraft and 12 crew members. This disparity was staggering. Additionally, the light cruiser Yohagi and 4 destroyers were sunk. The remaining 4 destroyers rescued as many survivors as they could and retreated back to Japan. The Battle of the East China Sea showcased the overwhelming superiority of carrier-based aviation over surface warships. The sinking of Yamato shocked Japan. For the first time, the government officially acknowledged that its most formidable battleship had been destroyed. The announcement portrayed Yamato's mission in grandiose terms, asserting that the vessel had bravely fought against insurmountable odds to protect Okinawa. In reality, however, the situation was far more grim. Yamato failed to achieve any significant objectives other than increasing the casualty count by 3,000 lives. The ship did not sink a single American vessel, prevent any landings, or even come within visual range of Okinawa. For the United States Navy, Yamato's destruction marked a definitive shift in naval warfare paradigms. Carrier-based aircraft had become the paramount vessels for all maritime operations. The sinking of Yamato greatly influenced subsequent decades of American naval strategy, reinforcing the idea that concentrated air attacks could neutralize any surface target. Coordinating efforts across multiple carrier groups further enhanced combat efficiency, as simultaneous torpedo strikes on one side of a ship expedited its capsizing. Survivors of Yamato carried vivid memories of the battle throughout their lives. Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida, the radar officer who had recorded his thoughts in a journal before the engagement, managed to survive the sinking and was later rescued by a destroyer after spending hours floating in oil-soaked waters. Post-war, he penned Requiem for Battleship Yamato, an extensively detailed account of the ship's final voyage that became a bestseller in Japan and remains the most thorough first-person narrative of the engagement. Yoshida described the profound psychological toll of serving on a vessel widely recognized as destined for destruction, with crew members fully aware they were heading to certain death. Despite this grim reality, discipline remained unwavering. Crewmen carried out their duties without panic or hesitation. American military leaders thoroughly examined the battle. After-action reports generated by Task Force 58 meticulously dissected every facet of the engagement. Torpedoes proved significantly more effective than bombs when targeting heavily armored warships. Yamato's armor had largely shrugged off bomb strikes, but torpedoes found their mark below the armor belt, where the hull was more vulnerable. Coordinated attacks on a single side of the ship led to uncontrollable flooding and rapid capsizing. The synergy between dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters greatly increased overall effectiveness. Dive bombers and fighters suppressed anti-aircraft fire, thereby reducing losses for torpedo bombers during their assault runs. The sheer volume of aircraft overpowered Japanese defenses. Despite firing thousands of shells, Yamato's anti-aircraft guns managed to shoot down just 10 American planes. Beyond the immediate tactical lessons, the strategic ramifications of Yamato's destruction were profound. Japan's decision to deploy its most formidable battleship in a suicide mission highlighted the dire straits Japan found itself in by April 1945. Rational military calculations did not support Operation Tengo's feasibility. The order was given for psychological and political reasons rather than military ones. American strategists understood this mindset and felt apprehensive about it. If Japan was willing to sacrifice 3,000 sailors on a doomed battleship mission, how many lives would be lost in an invasion of the Japanese home islands? The Battle of Okinawa, which raged when Yamato was sunk, underscored the Japanese willingness to fight to the death. Over 100,000 soldiers and civilians perished defending Okinawa. After the war, Yamato emerged as a potent symbol in Japanese culture. Representing both the technical prowess of Japanese engineering and the tragic futility of Japan's war effort, the battleship held significant cultural weight. The 1974 anime series Space Battleship, Yamato envisioned raising the sunken ship from the depths and converting it into a spacecraft to save Earth from an alien invasion threat. The series gained immense popularity, setting a new standard for space opera anime. In 2005, the film Yamato recounted the final voyage of the battleship from various crew members' viewpoints and grossed over 5 billion yen at the box office. The same year, the Yamato Museum opened in Kure, marking 60 years since the sinking of the ship. This museum houses a life-sized 1:10 scale model of Yamato along with artifacts, photographs, and detailed exhibits that showcase the ship's construction and service history. Each year, hundreds of thousands of visitors flock to the museum, Several expeditions have successfully located and photographed the wreck of Yamato on the ocean floor, approximately 340 meters below sea level. The site is protected under Japanese law as a war grave, which prohibits any salvage or disturbance activities. The remains of the more than 3,000 sailors who perished aboard Yamato lie alongside their vessel. The historical significance and value of Yamato continue to be debated. While some view her construction as an engineering marvel and the pinnacle of battleship development, others see it as a colossal waste of resources that came too late in naval warfare's evolution. Both views hold merit. Yamato was indeed an extraordinary feat of naval architecture with innovative design features. However, she became strategically outdated even before completion. The allocation of resources to build Yamato and her sister ship, Yuzashi, could have been used to construct around 45 destroyers or 6 large aircraft carriers, a need that Japan had acutely during the war. Yamato's fuel consumption during her short operational lifespan could have powered numerous smaller warships for actual combat operations. The 3,000 crew members who perished on April 7, 1945, were highly skilled naval personnel whose loss was significant. Strategically speaking, Yamato required substantial resources while yielding minimal outcomes. Nevertheless, there is an undeniable awe associated with her existence. She embodied the pinnacle of what was technologically achievable in battleship construction. Her guns remain the largest ever installed on a warship, and her armor remains the thickest ever fitted to any vessel. Additionally, her displacement set an unbreakable record for battleships, as no nation will ever construct such ships again. In this regard, Yamato achieved a form of immortality not through combat effectiveness, but by marking the definitive end of an era in warship design. The American pilots who sank Yamato were aware they were making history. They had destroyed the heaviest battleship ever built. However, for many of them, it was just another mission during a prolonged conflict. Several pilots wrote home about the engagement, describing both the immense size of the battleship and the intensity of its anti-aircraft fire. Yet there was no grand celebration. By April 1945, American naval aviators were professionals carrying out their duties efficiently. Sinking Yamato was satisfying but not unexpected, given that they had the training, experience, aircraft, and numerical superiority to destroy any ship afloat. This contrast between American professionalism and Japanese desperation characterized the latter stages of the Pacific War in 1945. American forces approached combat with overwhelming material advantages and meticulous tactical planning. In contrast, Japanese forces, lacking both resources and viable strategies, resorted to suicidal attacks aimed at causing psychological damage rather than achieving tangible military success. Yamato's final mission epitomized this pattern. Despite being unlikely to succeed militarily, it was intended as a symbolic gesture rather than a strategic move. The 3,000 lives lost when Yamato went down did nothing to halt the relentless American advance. Okinawa fell shortly after, and U.S. aircraft began freely bombing Japan's home islands. 4 months later, Japan surrendered unconditionally. Ironically, Yamato was sunk while attempting precisely what American forces aimed for. The mission to Okinawa lured Yamato into waters where American carrier-based planes could easily destroy her. If she had stayed in port, Yamato would have posed a significant threat during any invasion of the Japanese mainland. Destroying her from an anchored position would have been challenging. Instead, Japan's leadership chose to sacrifice the battleship as part of a futile gesture rather than using it for actual defense. When American commanders learned about Operation Tengo through intelligence, they were astounded by their good fortune. Task Force 58 promptly obliterated Yamato completely. Today, she lies at the bottom of the East China Sea, a grave sight for 3,000 souls and a testament to the end of the battleship era. Yamato never realized the decisive surface battle Japanese strategists had envisioned. She failed to justify the enormous investment in her construction, yet she remains immortalized due to what she represented, the pinnacle of human engineering within the limitations of battleship design. Japanese admirals once claimed that Yamato was unsinkable and the greatest battleship ever built, invincible in surface combat. While they were correct about its unmatched power, nearly 400 American aircraft and less than 2 hours of combat decisively disproved those claims. The sinking of Yamato underscored how naval warfare had fundamentally shifted. Even the most formidable battleship would be vulnerable if the adversary held supremacy in the skies. The era of dominance for battleships came to an end with the sinking of Yamato on April 7, 1945. Thereafter, the age of aircraft carriers took over, and Japan had already fallen behind in this new arena.